I hired security to handle trespassing issues.
You hired a bounty hunter with embezzled funds.
And protecting the painted river stone that marked his mother's memorial. Contracted security, the man said, tightening his grip. Authorized to detain trespassers on HOA property. What he didn't know, what Denise Whitmore didn't know when she hired him, was that the teenager he was grabbing was an FBI agent's son, and the trespassing was happening on public property where my late wife's ashes had been scattered 18 months ago. I'm Daniel Cross, 15 years with the Bureau, specializing in white-collar crime and wire fraud. I've taken down organized criminal enterprises that thought they were untouchable. And I'd just watched an HOA president make the kind of mistake that turns a property dispute into a federal case. If you've ever had someone try to erase your right to grieve, to visit a place that holds your most sacred memories, then hit subscribe now. Let go of my son, I said, badge already out. FBI Special Agent Cross. You're on public easement property with zero legal authority to detain anyone. The bounty hunter, because that's what he was, a licensed PI Denise had hired to enforce imaginary rules, released Tyler immediately. His face went from confident to calculating as he processed that he'd just grabbed a federal agent's kid. Ma'am hired me to handle trespassing issues, he said, backing away. Said there was a suspicious minor repeatedly accessing restricted areas. This is a public creek on county-protected easement, I said, and that suspicious minor is visiting the spot where we scattered his mother's ashes. The woman who hired you just committed half a dozen violations of civil rights law. Tyler was shaking, still holding the memorial stone. Smooth river rock he'd painted with his mom's favorite quote, "Find peace in wild places." Catherine had chosen this creek in her final weeks, made me promise I'd help our son find peace here after she was gone. She died from cancer that moved too fast, leaving me with a 16-year-old who needed this place to process grief I couldn't fix. The board president had been sending citations for 6 weeks. Unauthorized access to restricted common areas. $500, then $200 more daily. I'd responded with legal documentation proving the easement was public property. She'd escalated by installing surveillance cameras to track Tyler's visits. Then she'd filed false police reports claiming suspicious minor possibly conducting illegal activities. Now she'd hired a bounty hunter. The security consultant, former colleague of hers from some private security firm, stood there looking at his phone, probably texting Denise that her plan had gone sideways. Tyler was crying, not from pain, but from violation, from having his grief treated like criminal activity, from watching his mother's memorial become a battleground. I took photos of everything, the bounty hunter's credentials, Tyler's arm where he'd been grabbed, the memorial stone, the creek where Catherine's ashes drifted in water she'd loved, evidence, chain of custody, documentation, because Denise Whitmore had just turned a widower protecting his son's grief into an FBI agent investigating federal wire fraud, and she had no idea how much she'd lose for trying to monetize other people's pain. The cameras watching us from the trees belonged to an HOA that had paid for them, but they were owned by Denise's private security company, and that distinction was about to cost her everything. I took Tyler home first. He was still shaking, the adrenaline crash hitting hard after the bounty hunter's grab. We sat in my home office while I documented everything. Timestamps, photos, the bounty hunter's business card that listed him as Marcus Webb, licensed private investigator and security consultant. "Dad, I wasn't trespassing," Tyler said for the third time, like he needed me to confirm reality. "Mom wanted to be there. You said we could visit whenever. You weren't trespassing. You were exercising legal access to public property." I pulled up the county plat map on my computer, showed him the easement designation from 1987. This path has been public access for 37 years. The HOA has zero authority to restrict it. Then why does she keep saying I'm breaking rules? Because Denise Whitmore doesn't care about rules. She cares about control. I zoomed in on the creek area, traced the easement boundary with my cursor, and she's been using that control to run a profitable side business. Tyler looked at me with Catherine's eyes, that same expression she'd get when something didn't make sense. "What do you mean? Those surveillance cameras watching you? The HOA paid to have them installed, but they're owned by the board president's private security company. She's been billing the community for safety systems she then profits from." I pulled up my preliminary research from the past week, HOA financial reports that were public record in Virginia. Over 4 years, Riverside Meadows has paid her company $280,000 for equipment and monitoring services. That's legal? No. That's wire fraud, when HOA funds move electronically across state lines to benefit a board member's private business. I'd been building this case in my head since the first citation arrived. White-collar crime was my specialty. The moment Denise started harassing Tyler, I'd started following the money. Her company is registered in Maryland. The HOA is in Virginia. Every electronic transfer crosses state lines. That triggers federal jurisdiction. Tyler picked up the memorial stone he'd brought back with him, refused to leave it at the creek after the bounty hunter had tried to grab it. Catherine's quote was fading from weather and Tyler's tears. He'd need to repaint it soon. She knew, didn't she, he said quietly, that I was visiting Mom. The cameras recorded me crying there. I'd reviewed the HOA surveillance footage request logs. Denise had accessed camera feeds overlooking the creek 47 times in 6 weeks. She'd watched my son grieve and decided it was trespassing worth criminalizing. She knew, I confirmed, and she hired someone to physically detain you anyway. Why? Because you challenged her authority by refusing to stop visiting. Because your presence on that easement reminded the community that some places don't belong to the HOA, no matter what she claims. Because she's running this neighborhood like it's her private security state, and you're the teenager who wouldn't submit. Tyler was quiet for a long moment. Then, what are you going to do? I'm going to do what I do for a living, follow the money, build the case, and make sure the woman who sent a bounty hunter after you at your mother's grave understands exactly what federal wire fraud prosecution looks like. My phone buzzed. Text from Marcus Webb, the bounty hunter. Need to talk. Didn't know about the kid's mom. Whitmore told me he was suspected drug dealer using Creek for transactions. I never would have touched him if I'd known the truth. I stared at that message. The security consultant had lied to her own contractor to justify force against a grieving teenager. She'd invented a drug dealer's story to make Tyler sound dangerous enough to warrant physical detention. That wasn't overzealous HOA enforcement. That was calculated character assassination of a minor. And it was going in my report to the FBI field office tomorrow morning. Get some rest, I told Tyler. Tomorrow I'm filing complaints with 3 different agencies. By the end of the week, Denise Whitmore is going to wish she'd left you alone. Will she go to jail? If I build the case right? Yes. For a long time. I looked at the memorial stone, at Catherine's fading words about finding peace in wild places. Your mother made me promise to protect your right to grieve however you need to. The board president just found out what happens when you threaten a promise I made to a dying woman. Tyler managed a small smile. Mom would say you're being scary protective dad. Mom would be right. I pulled up my FBI case management system, started a new file. Whitmore, Denise, wire fraud investigation. Now go to bed. School tomorrow. After he left, I sat in the dark office reviewing everything I had so far. Financial records showing interstate transfers, false police reports creating paper trail of harassment, surveillance footage of Tyler's grief being monitored, a bounty hunter hired with HOA funds to enforce non-existent authority on public property. The enforcer in Crimson had spent 7 years building her little security empire, and she just made it a federal case by putting hands on my son at his mother's memorial. Some mistakes you don't recover from. The next morning, I found Howard Chen in his backyard, staring at a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking. My next-door neighbor for 8 months, Howard had been Catherine's friend, brought her soup during chemo, talked gardening with her when she could still walk outside. After she died, he'd been kind, but distant. Now I knew why. Daniel, he said when he saw me at the fence. His hands were shaking slightly. I heard about yesterday. Tyler okay? Physically, yes. Emotionally? I shook my head. Your HOA president hired a bounty hunter to grab a 16-year-old at his mother's memorial. So no, not really okay. Howard's jaw tightened. He set down his coffee, clasped his hands together like he was trying to stop the trembling. I didn't know she was going to do that. I swear, I didn't, but you knew she was doing something. I kept my voice level. You're the treasurer, Howard. You sign off on financial reports. You've seen the payments to her security company. His eyes darted to his house, then back to me, checking if his wife Jessica was listening. She wasn't home. I'd watched her leave for her school board meeting 20 minutes ago. That's why I'd come now. I can't talk about this, Howard said, but his voice lacked conviction. Board confidentiality doesn't apply to criminal activity. and wire fraud is a federal crime. I pulled out my phone, showed him the preliminary analysis I'd done. $280,000 in 4 years, Howard. HOA funds transferred to a board member's private business. You signed every financial report that documented those transfers. She said it was proper contracting. His hands were shaking harder now, fingers laced so tight his knuckles went white. That the HOA needed security systems and her company provided them at competitive rates. Does the HOA own the equipment it paid for? Howard went very still. That was answer enough. She told you the HOA owns them, didn't she? I pressed. But the cameras, the monitoring systems, the access controls, they're all registered to Secure Watch Community Systems, LLC, Denise's Maryland company. The HOA paid for equipment that she owns and charges residents monthly fees to access. I didn't. Howard's voice broke. I suspected something wasn't right 6 months ago. The numbers didn't match up. But she said if I questioned her financial decisions, she'd make sure everyone knew about my bankruptcy, that I'd filed Chapter 7 10 years ago, that I couldn't be trusted with community funds. He looked at me with something between guilt and desperation. Jessica's on the school board. If Denise spreads rumors about my financial history, it could damage Jessica's position. She's worked so hard for that seat. So you stayed quiet while the board president committed felony wire fraud. I stayed quiet while she harassed families. Howard finally met my eyes. Including yours. Catherine was my friend Daniel. She talked about that creek constantly during treatment, about how Tyler needed to learn to find peace in nature like she did. She made me promise I'd look out for you two after she was gone. His voice cracked, and I watched Denise target your son for visiting his mother's memorial, and I did nothing because I was afraid of gossip. You're doing something now. You're talking to me. Because yesterday, a bounty hunter grabbed a grieving kid, and I realized some things matter more than protecting my reputation. Howard pulled out his phone with shaking hands. I have emails, financial records Denise thought I'd deleted. Evidence that she's been running this scheme in 4 other HOAs across Virginia and Maryland. It's not just Riverside Meadows, it's organized fraud. I felt my pulse quicken. Multi-state operation changed everything. How many HOAs? 4 that I know of. Maybe more. She sits on all their boards, sells them security systems, bills them through shell companies. He pulled up an email, showed me. This is from 2 years ago. Another treasurer questioning the expenses. Denise threatened to accuse him of embezzlement if he didn't approve the payments. He resigned 3 months later. Pattern of intimidation and fraud across multiple jurisdictions. I was already thinking like a prosecutor. Howard, I need everything you have. Every email, every financial record, every conversation where she threatened or coerced board members. If I give you this, she'll destroy me. If you don't, she'll destroy more families, more kids like Tyler who just want to visit their parents' memorials without being treated like criminals. I looked at the fence between our properties, thought about Catherine sitting in her garden talking to Howard about flowers and hope. You made a promise to my wife. Help me keep the one I made to her. Howard looked at his house again, at the space where his wife wasn't home, to see him betray the woman who held threats over them both. His hands were still shaking, but he nodded. Everything I have, he said, every document, every email where the security consultant threatened someone into silence, every financial report I signed that I knew was fraudulent. He met my eyes. I'm going to lose Jessica's respect for this, but I can't watch another kid get hurt because I was too afraid to do the right thing. Jessica will understand. Eventually. Maybe. Howard pulled out a flash drive from his pocket, like he'd been carrying it around waiting for courage. But Catherine would have kicked my ass for waiting this long. So here, everything. Make sure that woman never terrorizes another family. I took the flash drive. She hired a bounty hunter to grab my son at his mother's grave, Howard. By the time I'm done building this case, she'll wish she'd retired quietly last year. Good. He looked exhausted, relieved, terrified. Tell Tyler I'm sorry for not protecting him sooner. Tell him yourself, after this is over, and he can visit that creek without cameras watching him grieve. I waited until Monday morning to confront her. The HOA administration office sat at the front of Riverside Meadows, a converted gatehouse where Denise held court like it was her personal command center. Security monitors lined one wall, feeds from the 47 cameras her company had installed and the HOA had paid for. She was reviewing footage when I walked in. The screen showed Tyler at the creek 2 days ago, before the bounty hunter arrived. My son sitting on the bank, talking to the memorial stone like his mother could hear him. "Agent Cross," Denise said, without looking away from the monitors. "I assume you're here about the security incident on Saturday. You mean when your hired contractor physically detained my minor son on public property? When contracted security responded to repeated unauthorized access violations?" She finally turned to face me, and I saw the former security guard in her posture, shoulders back, chin up, completely convinced of her authority. "Your son has been trespassing for 6 weeks, despite multiple citations. We escalated to physical intervention when citations proved ineffective. He was on public easement, county protected since 1987. I pulled out the plat map, set it on her desk. "You have no legal authority to restrict access to that creek." The board president glanced at the map, then pushed it back toward me. "HOA bylaws supersede county designations within community boundaries. Every resident agreed to those terms when they purchased property here. No HOA bylaw supersedes state or federal law, and public easements are protected regardless of what your bylaws claim." I kept my voice level, professional. "You've been filing false citations for 6 weeks, Denise, charging my family for violations that don't exist. The citations are valid enforcement of community standards. And the bounty hunter? Is hiring private security to detain minors on public property also a community standard?" She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "Marcus Webb is a licensed private investigator contracted to identify and document individuals violating HOA property access protocols. He has legal standing to question suspected trespassers. He grabbed my son's arm and attempted to detain him. That's assault on a minor, not questioning." I pulled out my phone, showed her the photos of bruises forming where Webb had grabbed Tyler, and the suspected trespasser was visiting the spot where we scattered his mother's ashes. "You knew that. Your cameras recorded him there 47 times. Something flickered in her expression, not guilt, but annoyance at being caught monitoring. "Surveillance is necessary for community safety. If your son is accessing restricted areas repeatedly, documentation is appropriate. He's grieving his dead mother at a public creek. You're surveilling a teenager processing trauma." I put my phone away. "And you lied to Marcus Webb about why he was there. Told him Tyler was a suspected drug dealer conducting transactions. You made my son sound dangerous to justify force against him." The security consultant's jaw tightened. "I provided Webb with context for suspicious behavior patterns. Your son's repeated visits to an isolated area triggered security protocols. My son's grief triggered your need for control." I leaned forward. "But here's what you didn't consider when you decided to harass a federal agent's family. I specialize in financial crimes, wire fraud specifically, and I've spent the past week analyzing HOA financial records." Now she went very still. $280,000, I continued. "That's what Riverside Meadows has paid your company over 4 years for security systems. Except the HOA doesn't own that equipment, does it? You do. Through SecureWatch Community Systems, registered in Maryland. The HOA paid for cameras and monitoring that you own and charge residents monthly fees to access. That's standard security contracting. That's wire fraud when HOA funds transfer electronically across state lines to benefit a board member's private business. Every payment from the Virginia HOA to your Maryland company creates federal jurisdiction." I pulled out Howard's flash drive, set it next to the plat map. "And according to your own treasurer, you've been running the same scheme in 4 other HOAs. That's organized criminal enterprise, Denise, not standard contracting." The enforcer in crimson stared at the flash drive like it was a bomb. "Howard gave you confidential financial records? Howard provided evidence of systematic fraud to a federal law enforcement officer. That's not a violation of confidentiality. That's cooperation with a criminal investigation." I stood. "You have 2 choices. Resign from the board immediately, return all fraudulently obtained funds, and cooperate with the investigation. Or fight this and face federal prosecution for wire fraud, conspiracy, filing false police reports, and civil rights violations. You're threatening me because your son broke rules? I'm informing you that hiring a bounty hunter to physically detain a minor at his mother's memorial was the mistake that turned your HOA power trip into a federal case." I headed for the door, then stopped. "My wife died 18 months ago. She made me promise to help Tyler find peace in the wild places she loved. You tried to criminalize that promise because it challenged your authority. Now you're going to learn what happens when you target a federal agent's family while running a multi-state fraud operation. You can't prove any of this. I can prove all of it. I have financial records, email trails, witness testimony from your own treasurer, and evidence you coordinated with Marcus Webb to assault a minor based on fabricated drug dealer claims. I looked at the security monitors showing Tyler's grief. You recorded your own crime pattern, Denise. Every citation, every surveillance hour, every threatening letter, documented. You made my job easy. The board president's confident mask finally cracked. This is about property values and community safety. Everything I've done has been about profiting from fear while claiming authority you don't have. And you crossed the line when you put hands on my son. I opened the door. Expect federal agents within a week. Start finding a lawyer, a good one, because wire fraud across 5 jurisdictions carries 20 years minimum if prosecuted fully. I left her sitting there, staring at the monitors showing my son's memorial visits, the evidence she'd created herself, thinking surveillance proved authority instead of exposing systematic harassment. Some people learn too late that power without legitimacy is just tyranny waiting to be prosecuted. The county planning department occupied the 3rd floor of a building that smelled like old files and bureaucracy. James Reynolds, the planning director, pulled up records that hadn't been questioned in decades, maps showing exactly what Denise Whitmore had been lying about for 6 weeks. This easement was established in 1987, Reynolds said, highlighting the path on his computer screen. Public access guaranteed in perpetuity as condition of the original development approval. The developer wanted to build closer to the creek. County said no unless they preserved public access corridor. Can an HOA override that? Absolutely not. Public easements supersede all private agreements, including HOA covenants. He zoomed in on the creek area where Tyler's memorial stone sat. This specific section, everything within 15 feet of the creek bank, is county-protected environmental corridor. No private entity can restrict access, modify terrain, or claim exclusive use. I photographed the screen, the official designation, the legal language that made every citation Denise had issued void. She's been charging my family $700 per incident for trespassing on public property. Reynolds's expression darkened. That's fraudulent citation enforcement. How many times? 8 citations over 6 weeks. $5,600 in total fines threatened. Mr. Cross, I need to be clear about something. When an HOA knowingly restricts access to public easements and charges residents for using them, that's not just a civil matter. It's criminal fraud. He pulled up another document. Virginia Code 18.2178 makes it illegal to fraudulently claim authority over public access rights. If she knew this was public property, she knew. I sent her the county plat map 4 weeks ago, proving easement status. Then she continued citing you anyway? Reynolds made notes. That's willful fraud. And if she's been doing this to other residents, she has. Multiple families cited for using walking trails and creek access that are legally public. I thought about the elderly residents Howard had mentioned, harassed for walking dogs on paths they had every right to use. She's created an environment where people believe the HOA controls public spaces. Reynolds pulled up a complaint database. Has anyone filed formal complaints about access restrictions? They're too afraid. She's the president, has been for 7 years. People assume she knows the law. Well, she doesn't, or she's deliberately ignoring it for profit. He printed out the easement documentation, handed me official certified copies. This proves your son has a legal right to access that creek. Any future citations are actionable fraud. I'm also flagging this for county attorney review. If the HOA has been systematically restricting public access, there could be broader enforcement action. I took the documents, felt the weight of official proof in my hands. Tyler wasn't trespassing. He'd never been trespassing. Every citation, every threatening letter, every hour of surveillance, all of it targeting a teenager exercising his legal right to visit public land where his mother's ashes rested. There's something else, Reynolds said, pulling up building permits. Those surveillance cameras overlooking the easement, they were installed without county permits. You can't place private surveillance equipment on structures overlooking public property without approval. It's a privacy violation. The HOA paid for them, but they're owned by the board president's private security company. His eyebrows shot up. That's a conflict of interest that would never pass county review. HOA funds used for equipment that benefits a board member personally? That's potentially criminal even without the easement fraud. It gets better. She's been running the same scheme in 4 other HOAs. Maryland and Virginia, interstate wire transfers for all payments. Then you've got federal wire fraud on top of state fraud charges. Reynolds leaned back. Mr. Cross, I've been planning director for 18 years. I've seen HOA overreach before. But this, systematically restricting public access while profiting from fraudulent security installations, this is organized criminal operation, not just aggressive rule enforcement. That's what I'm building the case to prove. How can I help? Official statement confirming easement status, documentation of unpermitted surveillance, and any records of other residents complaining about restricted access that the HOA dismissed. Reynolds pulled up more files. I have 12 complaints over 5 years, all from Riverside Meadows residents claiming they were cited for using walking trails. All complaints dismissed because residents were told HOA authority superseded county easement rights. He printed the complaints. Every one of these people has potential fraud claims against the security consultant. I reviewed the names. Elderly couples, young families, single parents, all targeted for using public property, all intimidated into believing they were violating HOA rules when they were exercising legal rights. The woman who sent a bounty hunter after my son has been running a protection racket, I said quietly. Restrict public access, create fear about trespassing, charge fines for violations that don't exist, then sell security systems to residents scared of enforcement. It's organized extortion dressed up as community safety. And when people like your son challenge the restrictions, she escalates. Surveillance, false police reports, hired security contractors, anything to maintain the illusion that she controls access to public land. I thought about Tyler being grabbed at the memorial, about Catherine's final wish being weaponized into citations and threats. My wife chose that creek because it was public, because she knew Tyler could always visit, that no one could take that access away from him. The board president tried to make her wrong. Reynolds gathered all the documentation, placed it in an official county envelope. Your wife was right. Public easements exist precisely so places like that creek remain accessible to everyone. No HOA, no matter how powerful its president, can override that protection. I left the planning department with proof that every citation was void, every fine was fraudulent, every restriction was illegal. The enforcer in Crimson had built her authority on lies about property rights, and I'd just collected the official documents that exposed every one of them. Tyler's grief was legal, his memorial visits were protected, and the woman who'd tried to criminalize both was about to face prosecution for systematic fraud against families who'd trusted her to know the law. Some authority is real. Some is just confidence backed by nothing. Denise Whitmore was about to learn the difference. That evening, I sat with Tyler in my FBI field office, reviewing surveillance footage that Howard had copied from the HOA system before resigning as treasurer. 47 separate recordings of my son at the creek, time-stamped and dated, each one capturing moments that should have been private grief. Tyler watched himself on screen. June 3rd, sitting by the memorial stone talking to it like Catherine could hear. June 10th, repainting the quote when rain had faded it. June 17th, crying so hard his shoulders shook. Every visit documented, every moment of vulnerability recorded. She watched all of this, Tyler said quietly, and still called me a trespasser. She watched all of this and decided your grief was a security threat. I paused the footage on a frame showing Tyler's face, tear-streaked and exhausted. This is what she presented to Marcus Webb as suspicious behavior, a kid mourning his mother. Why would she do this? Because you challenged her authority by refusing to stop coming, because every time you accessed that creek, you proved she doesn't control what she claims to control. I pulled up the county planning documents. This easement has been public since before you were born. She built 7 years of HOA presidency on convincing people she had power over it. Your visits exposed that lie. Tyler looked at the memorial stone he'd brought home, still clutching it like letting go would mean losing his mother again. Dad, in the June 17th video, that was the anniversary of when she got her diagnosis. I went to tell her I got accepted to the college she wanted me to go to, and this woman recorded me crying about it. I felt rage settle into something colder than anger. The security consultant hadn't just targeted my son for trespassing. She'd monetized his grief, turned his most vulnerable moments into surveillance footage used to justify hiring a bounty hunter. "Look at this," I said, pulling up Howard's financial records. Every camera installation was billed separately. The HOA paid $280,000 for security systems. But here, I highlighted monthly charges to residents. Your neighbors are paying $45 monthly for monitoring services to access cameras their HOA dues already purchased. She's charging people twice? She's charging people to be surveilled on public property with equipment they already paid for through HOA fees. I traced the payment flow. HOA funds go to her Maryland company for installation. Company retains ownership. Residents pay monthly fees for access. And when someone like you challenges her restrictions, she uses footage from cameras the community paid for to justify enforcement actions. That's fraud. That's wire fraud, conspiracy, and about 6 other federal charges. I pulled up more files from Howard's flash drive, and it's not just Riverside Meadows. She's been running identical schemes in 4 other HOAs. Same billing structure, same intimidation tactics when people question her authority, same escalation to hired security when residents don't comply. Tyler scrolled through the evidence, spreadsheets showing payments across 5 communities, emails from Denise threatening other treasurers who questioned expenses, contracts that gave her company's ownership of equipment HOAs funded. How much money total? Across all 5 HOAs over 4 years, about $750,000 in fraudulent billing, plus monthly fees from approximately 800 households at $45 each. She's grossing $430,000 annually from monitoring services alone. Jesus. It's organized criminal enterprise disguised as community safety consulting, and every electronic payment from Virginia and Maryland HOAs to her companies creates federal jurisdiction. I pulled up the wire fraud statute. 18 U.S.C. 1343, maximum 20 years per count if prosecuted fully. With 5 HOAs and multiple years of fraud, we're looking at dozens of counts. Will she actually go to jail? If I build this case right and the U.S. attorney prosecutes aggressively? Yes, for a long time. I looked at the surveillance footage still paused on Tyler's grief. But that's not why I'm doing this. I'm doing this because the woman who sent a bounty hunter after you at your mother's memorial needs to understand that some places are sacred, some grief is protected, and no HOA president, no matter how long they've been in power, gets to criminalize a son visiting his mother's resting place. Tyler was quiet for a long moment, studying the evidence spread across my desk. Mom would say you're going full FBI scary mode. Mom would be helping me organize the prosecution timeline. I thought about Catherine, who'd chosen that creek specifically because it was public land, no one could restrict. She'd known, even dying, she'd known, that Tyler would need unrestricted access to grieve. Your mother made me promise to protect your right to find peace in wild places. The board president tried to void that promise for profit. Now she gets to face what happens when you target federal agents' families while running multi-state fraud operations. When does this go to the U.S. attorney? Tomorrow. I have financial evidence, surveillance footage showing systematic targeting, witness testimony from Howard, proof of public easement restrictions, and Marcus Webb's statement that Denise lied about you being a drug dealer to justify force. I started organizing files for formal referral. By Friday, federal investigators will be interviewing everyone she's defrauded. By next month, she'll be indicted. And I can visit the creek without being watched? The first thing I'm doing is getting a federal order removing all surveillance equipment from public easement property. Those cameras come down this week. Your grief stops being a security feed. Tyler picked up the memorial stone, traced his mother's quote with his finger. She tried to take this from me. The one place I feel close to Mom. The place Mom specifically chose so I'd always have access. And she failed. Because public easements exist exactly for this reason. So places that matter can't be controlled by people with authority complexes. I pulled up the county planning map one more time, showed him the protected designation. This creek belongs to everyone, Tyler, including grieving kids who need to visit their mothers. No HOA president changes that. He nodded, still holding the stone. When this is over, when she can't threaten us anymore, can we make it official? Mom's memorial? County's already working on permanent sanctuary designation. Your memorial stone becomes a protected landmark. Your mother's resting place becomes legally recognized public space. I met his eyes. Catherine Cross Memorial Nature Sanctuary, protected in perpetuity, just like she wanted. She'd like that. She'd love that, and she'd be proud of you for not letting anyone tell you your grief was trespassing. Howard Chen showed up at my door at 9 p.m., carrying a banker's box that looked like it weighed more than just paper. His hands weren't shaking anymore. Now they looked steady with the kind of resolve that comes from finally doing the right thing after too long avoiding it. "Can I come in?" he asked. "Jessica knows I'm here." She insisted, actually. Said Catherine would have kicked both our asses for waiting this long. I let him in, led him to my home office, where evidence was already spread across every surface. Howard set the box on my desk with a heavy thud. 4 years of financial records, he said. Every fraudulent invoice, every threatening email, every board meeting where the security consultant bullied members into approving payments they knew were wrong. He pulled out the first folder. This is Riverside Meadows, but here, he stacked 4 more folders. Oakmont Hills HOA in Maryland, Pinecrest Village in Virginia, Sunset Ridge Community in Virginia, and Lakewood Estates back in Maryland. All of them paying SecureWatch community systems for security installations they don't own. I opened the Oakmont Hills folder, same billing structure as ours. Same pattern of equipment purchases followed by monthly monitoring fees. Same board president's signature on every approval, Denise Whitmore. "She's on all 5 boards?" I asked. "President of 3, vice president of 2. She rotates terms so she's never off all of them simultaneously. Been running this operation for 6 years across the 5 communities." Howard pulled out a spreadsheet he'd created. Total fraudulent billing, $743,000. Current annual revenue from monitoring fees, $432,000. She's built a 6-figure income stream by convincing HOAs they need security systems they then don't own. How did she get elected to boards in different states? She targets communities adjacent to each other, lives in Riverside Meadows but owns rental properties in the other 4 developments. That makes her eligible for board service. She runs on community safety platforms, gets elected, immediately proposes security upgrades, awards contracts to her own company. He pulled out more documents. Here's the pattern. She joins a board, creates fear about crime and trespassing within 6 months, proposes comprehensive security systems, gets board approval, installs equipment through SecureWatch, then charges residents for monitoring. And if board members question it, Howard's jaw tightened. She destroys them. I have documentation on 7 treasurers across the 5 HOAs who raised concerns. 3 were threatened with exposure of personal financial issues. 2 were accused of embezzlement and forced to resign. 1 was sued personally for defamation when he called her contracts fraudulent. Another just quit and moved rather than fight her. Pattern of witness intimidation. Systematic. She researches every board member's background, finds vulnerabilities, keeps files. He pulled out a thumb drive. This has her personal research folders on all current and former board members, credit reports, bankruptcy filings, divorce records, DUI arrests, business failures, anything she can weaponize if someone challenges her. I plugged in the drive, opened the files. There was Howard's bankruptcy from 10 years ago, another board member's son's juvenile record, a treasurer's extramarital affair, a secretary's husband's gambling problem, every weakness documented, cataloged, ready for deployment. She had all this on me, Howard said, pointing to his bankruptcy file. Threatened to leak it to school board colleagues if I opposed her. Said Jessica would lose her position once people knew her husband couldn't manage money. Extortion on top of fraud. It's how she maintains power. Find the leverage, apply pressure, silence dissent. He pulled out email printouts. These are from Martha Rodriguez, treasurer at Pinecrest Village. Martha questioned why the HOA was paying for equipment it didn't own. 2 weeks later, Denise filed an ethics complaint claiming Martha had embezzled $20,000. Martha had to hire a lawyer, spent $15,000 defending herself, eventually resigned just to stop the harassment. Turned out there was no embezzlement. Denise had just moved money between accounts and claimed it was theft. False accusations backed by nothing. False accusations backed by the board president's authority. Who do people believe? The treasurer asking uncomfortable questions, or the president with 7 years of safety-first leadership? Howard's voice turned bitter. I watched Martha get destroyed, and I said nothing because I was afraid Denise would do the same to me. You're saying something now. Because yesterday a bounty hunter grabbed a grieving kid and I realized I'd become complicit in something monstrous. Catherine trusted me, Daniel. She asked me to look out for you and Tyler, and I watched the board president target your son for visiting his mother's grave, and I did nothing because I was protecting my reputation. He pulled out the final folder, thicker than the others. This is everything. Financial fraud across 5 HOAs, witness intimidation, false accusations against 7 board members, evidence she falsified police reports in 3 jurisdictions claiming security threats that didn't exist, email chains where she coordinated with Marcus Webb on how to handle residents who wouldn't comply with restrictions. I opened the Webb folder. Messages dating back 8 months, showing Denise hiring him repeatedly for trespasser deterrence and security enforcement actions. One email made my blood run cold. Teenage repeat offender accessing restricted easement. Need physical intervention to establish consequences. Subject may resist. Authorized to use compliance holds. She ordered Webb to put hands on Tyler, I said quietly. This wasn't a security contractor exceeding authority. This was the board president explicitly ordering force against a minor. And Webb has no idea how much of this I documented. Denise thought I was too scared to copy her emails. She was right until she wasn't. Howard met my eyes. I'm prepared to testify. Federal court, state court, wherever this needs to go. I'll admit I signed fraudulent financial reports under duress. I'll confirm she threatened multiple board members. I'll provide every email showing she knew about public easement status and restricted access anyway. Your reputation is less important than making sure no other family gets targeted like yours was. Jessica agrees. She said if the school board doesn't want a treasurer who finally did the right thing, that's their problem. He pushed the entire box toward me. Burn her, Daniel. Use everything I have. Make sure the enforcer in Crimson spends years in federal prison thinking about the grieving kid she traumatized at his mother's memorial. I looked at the evidence. 6 years of systematic fraud, witness intimidation, and civil rights violations, all documented by the man she'd spent months threatening into silence. She's going to claim you falsified this out of revenge, I said. Let her try. Every email has metadata showing when it was sent. Every financial document matches HOA bank records. Every threatening message has timestamps proving she sent them. Howard pulled out one final item, a digital recorder. And I recorded our last 3 board meetings, including the one where she said Tyler's memorial visits were security theater designed to challenge my authority, and that she was eliminating the behavior through escalating consequences. I played the recording. Denise's voice, clear and cold. The crossboy needs to learn that public displays of grief don't override community safety protocols. If citations don't work, we escalate to physical deterrence. That's premeditation, I said. She planned the bounty hunter grab weeks in advance. She planned everything. That's how she operates. Calculate, intimidate, eliminate resistance. Howard stood, looking exhausted but resolved. I just gave you 6 years of her calculations. Show a jury what happens when authority becomes tyranny. After he left, I sat alone with evidence that would destroy 5 HOA boards and send the security consultant to federal prison for decades. Catherine would have been proud of Howard, and she would have told me to make sure no other family ever had to fight this fight again. Time to make sure Denise Whitmore learned that lesson permanently. The FBI conference room on Tuesday morning held more authority than any HOA board meeting Denise Whitmore had ever presided over. Supervisory Special Agent Karen Liu sat at the head of the table, flanked by Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Torres and Virginia State Police Financial Crimes Detective Sarah Park. I'd called this coordination meeting because wire fraud this systematic required a unified multi-agency response. Walk me through the scope, Karen said, reviewing the evidence spread before her. My supervisor for 8 years, she knew how I built cases, methodically, overwhelmingly, with no gaps for defense attorneys to exploit. 5 HOAs across Virginia and Maryland, I began, pulling up the financial analysis. $743,000 in fraudulent equipment billing over 6 years. Denise Whitmore sits on all 5 boards, awards contracts to her own company, retains equipment ownership while charging HOA's full purchase price, then bills residents monthly monitoring fees for systems they already funded. Wire fraud predicate? Torres asked, already anticipating federal jurisdiction questions. Every payment involves electronic transfer between states. Her company is Maryland registered. 3 HOAs are in Virginia. All banking crosses state lines, creating federal nexus. I showed him the wire transfer records Howard had provided. 18 U.S.C. 1343, fraud by wire transmission. Conservative count gives us 47 separate violations. Each carries up to 20 years. That's life without parole if we stack them, Torres said, making notes. We won't need to stack them. The pattern speaks for itself. I pulled up the witness intimidation evidence. She's also got systematic obstruction. 7 board members across 5 HOAs who questioned her finances, all threatened, accused of crimes, or forced out. Classic RICO predicates, fraud plus intimidation creating ongoing criminal enterprise. Detective Park leaned forward, studying the emails. This treasurer in Maryland, Martha Rodriguez, Whitmore filed false embezzlement claims against her, moved money between accounts, then accused Martha of theft to silence questions about equipment ownership. Martha spent $15,000 on legal defense before Denise quietly withdrew the complaint. I showed them the email where Denise admitted to another board member that the embezzlement claim was leverage for compliance. That's malicious prosecution, Park said. We can charge her at state level for that, while feds handle wire fraud. Coordinate timing, Karen suggested. State and federal indictments simultaneously. Show her this isn't HOA overreach. This is organized criminal prosecution. What triggered this? Torres asked. Wire fraud investigations usually come from financial institution reports or victim complaints. You initiated this personally. She hired a bounty hunter to physically detain my teenage son on public easement property where we scattered my late wife's ashes. I kept my voice professional, but everyone in the room understood personal stakes. Claimed he was trespassing, lied to her contractor that my son was a drug dealer to justify force. When I investigated, I found systematic fraud across 5 communities. Karen's expression hardened. She targeted your family while running multi-state fraud? She targeted my family because my son's memorial visits proved she didn't control what she claimed to control. Public easement access she'd been restricting for profit. Every citation she issued for creek access was fraudulent. County planning confirmed easement status has been protected since 1987. I pulled up the surveillance footage Howard had copied, and she recorded my son's grief visits 47 times, building a trespasser file on a kid visiting his mother's memorial. Torres watched the footage, Tyler crying at the memorial stone, talking to it like Catherine could hear. This is what she called suspicious activity? This is what she presented to Marcus Webb as grounds for physical detention. A grieving teenager became her justification for hiring private security on public property. Webb's cooperation status? Park asked. Full. He's providing recorded statements confirming Whitmore lied about drug dealer claims. He also has emails showing she explicitly ordered compliance holds if my son resisted. I showed them the evidence. Webb exceeded his PI licensing authority by attempting detention, but he was following orders from someone he believed had legitimate authority. Virginia DPR is reviewing his license, but his testimony against Whitmore is solid. Karen pulled up the financial records, traced payment flows between HOAs and Secure Watch community systems. This is textbook organized fraud. She's running protection racket, create fear about security, sell systems communities don't own, charge for monitoring, escalate enforcement when people challenge restrictions. It's extortion with HOA bylaws as cover. And when board members question finances? I asked. She destroys them with researched personal attacks. I showed them Denise's background files on board members, bankruptcies, divorces, juvenile records. She maintains intelligence dossiers on everyone in leadership, uses the information for coercion when they object to her contracts. That's conspiracy and obstruction, Torres said. RICO predicates just keep stacking. Detective Park was reviewing the email where Denise ordered Webb to use force. This is premeditation. She didn't just overreact to a situation. She planned physical intervention against a minor weeks in advance. Because Tyler's visits to his mother's memorial exposed her lie that HOAs control public easements. Every time he accessed that creek, he demonstrated she didn't have the authority she claimed. She couldn't allow that challenge to her power structure. So she escalated to violence. Karen closed the surveillance folder. Daniel, I know this is personal. Your son was targeted. But we need to make sure your involvement doesn't compromise prosecution. Defense will argue federal agent with grudge manufacturing case. I'm not manufacturing anything. Howard Chen provided 6 years of financial records and witness testimony. County planning provided easement documentation proving fraudulent citations. Virginia DPR is investigating Webb's licensing independently. Marcus Webb is cooperating without coercion. The evidence exists regardless of my family's involvement. I'm not questioning the evidence. I'm protecting prosecution from dismissal motions. Karen looked at Torres. We need independent verification of everything before indictment. Agreed, Torres said. But the predicate is solid. Wire fraud, RICO conspiracy, witness intimidation, false police reports. We've got multiple agencies building convergent cases. Defense can argue motivation, but they can't argue facts. Karen nodded. Then here's coordination strategy. FBI handles wire fraud and RICO. State police handle witness intimidation and malicious prosecution. County handles fraudulent citation enforcement and unpermitted surveillance. We announce simultaneously, demonstrate unified response to systematic abuse of authority. Timeline? I asked. Grand jury presentation next week. Indictment within 14 days. Arrest coordinated between federal marshals and state police. Karen looked at the evidence boxes. Daniel, you did good work here. But from this point forward, you're witness, not investigator. Understood? Understood. I just want to make sure the woman who terrorized my son faces every consequence she's earned. She will, Torres said. Wire fraud across 5 HOAs with 47 violations. Even with plea negotiations, she's looking at minimum 8 years federal, plus whatever state charges. And that's before civil suits from defrauded HOAs and intimidated board members. Detective Park added her notes to the case file. Every family she cited for public easement access has fraud claims. Every board member she threatened has civil rights claims. Every resident paying monitoring fees for equipment their HOAs funded has unjust enrichment claims. The board president is facing hundreds of thousands in civil liability, even after criminal convictions. Good, I said. Let every family she terrorized get restitution. Let every board member she intimidated get compensation. And let Denise Whitmore spend years in prison, understanding that authority without legitimacy is just tyranny waiting for prosecution. Marcus Webb's private investigation office sat above a bail bondsman in a strip mall that had seen better decades. He'd called me Tuesday afternoon, said he needed to talk before federal investigators came knocking. Now he sat across from me, looking like a man who'd realized he'd been used. I never would have touched that kid if I'd known the truth, Webb said, hands clasped on his desk. Whitmore told me he was a 16-year-old dealer using the creek for drug transactions. Said surveillance showed him meeting unknown individuals, exchanging items, displaying suspicious behavior patterns. He was visiting his mother's memorial, talking to a painted stone. The exchanging items was him bringing flowers. Webb pulled out his phone, showed me the briefing materials Denise had provided. Look at what she sent me. Subject demonstrates repeated unauthorized access to isolated area, exhibits furtive behavior, appears to be concealing items, shows signs of substance influence. She made him sound dangerous. I reviewed the descriptions. Every detail was technically accurate, but deliberately misleading. Tyler did access the creek repeatedly because it was his mother's memorial. He did exhibit emotional behavior because he was grieving. He did conceal items, the memorial stone he'd painted, protecting it from weather. She weaponized your legitimate security training against a grieving kid, I said, took normal grief behaviors and reframed them as criminal activity. And I believed her because she's an HOA president with 7 years' experience. I figured she knew her residents, understood the situation, had legitimate concerns. Webb's voice turned bitter. I've worked with her on 4 other contracts across her HOA properties. Every time she presented subjects as security threats. Now I'm wondering how many of those were just residents who challenged her authority. At least 7 that we've documented. Board members who questioned her finances, residents who used public easements she claimed to control, families who opposed her surveillance installations. I pulled out photos of the other HOAs. You've worked at all these communities? All 5. She calls me when residents become compliance problems. I document their movements, establish patterns, provide security assessments. Sometimes I question subjects about rule violations. He met my eyes. I never put hands on anyone except your son. And that's because she explicitly authorized physical intervention if he resisted identification. Do you have that authorization in writing? Webb pulled out his contract folder, showed me the email. Right here. Subject has demonstrated persistent non-compliance despite multiple citations, authorized to use compliance holds for identification and documentation purposes. Physical restraint acceptable if subject attempts to flee. She ordered you to grab a minor on public property. She ordered me to detain what she claimed was a drug dealer on HOA restricted land. Those are two very different things. Webb's jaw tightened. I'm licensed for fugitive recovery and private security. I'm authorized to question individuals and perform citizens' arrests under specific circumstances. But everything I'm allowed to do depends on the client providing accurate information about subjects and legal standing. She lied about both. She lied about everything. Your son wasn't a drug dealer. The creek isn't HOA restricted property, and she had no legal standing to order anyone detained for accessing public easements. He pulled out more emails. After I contacted you about the mother's memorial, I started reviewing all my contracts with her. Every single one has similar language. Subject demonstrates suspicious patterns, unauthorized access to restricted areas, potential security threat to community. All of it designed to make residents sound like criminals instead of people exercising legal rights. How much has she paid you over the years? $43,000 across 18 months, multiple HOAs, multiple subjects, all billed as security consulting and threat assessment. He showed me the invoices, and every payment came from HOA accounts, not her personally. She was using community funds to pay for enforcement actions against residents who challenged her. That's another layer of fraud. HOA dues funding personal vendettas. It's worse than that. Webb pulled up his licensing records. I'm required to maintain detailed logs of all investigations and enforcement actions. Every subject I've questioned, every report I've filed, every physical intervention I've performed. Virginia DPOR can audit these records. If they determine I exceeded my authority or acted on false pretenses, you lose your license. I lose everything. 20 years building a reputation as a legitimate investigator, gone because I trusted a client who was manufacturing security threats. Webb's hands were shaking now. When your son texted for help and you showed up with an FBI badge, I knew immediately something was wrong. No drug dealer's father arrives that fast. No trespasser has a parent who's federal law enforcement. I checked your son's background that night. Honors student, no record. Mother died from cancer 18 months ago. Then I looked at the surveillance footage Whitmore provided. It showed a kid crying at a creek, not conducting transactions. What did you do? I called her, asked why she'd lied about the subject being a dealer. She said I'd misinterpreted the briefing, and that she'd never claimed drug activity, just suspicious patterns requiring investigation. Textbook gaslighting. Then she reminded me I'd signed NDAs with all 5 HOAs, and that any disclosure of security operations would result in breach of contract lawsuits. She threatened you into silence. She tried, but I'm not staying silent when I grabbed a grieving kid at his mother's grave based on lies. Webb pushed his entire case file across the desk. Everything I have, emails from Whitmore ordering interventions, contracts showing HOA-funded enforcement, logs of every subject I've questioned at her direction, recorded briefings where she describes residents as security threats, and my statement that she deliberately misrepresented your son's activities to justify force. I reviewed the materials. 18 months of Webb conducting investigations for the security consultant, all funded by HOAs, all targeting residents who'd somehow challenged her authority. You're voluntarily providing this knowing it might cost your license? I'm providing this because I put hands on a 16-year-old who was visiting his dead mother, and I need to make that right. If DPOR revokes my license, I'll find another line of work. But I'm not letting that woman hide behind NDAs while destroying families. Webb pulled out one more item, a digital recorder. I also recorded my last conversation with her. After I confronted her about lying, she admitted she'd enhanced the threat assessment to ensure appropriate response levels. That's her words. Admitted fabrication to justify force. I took the recorder, played it, Denise's voice clear and unapologetic. Marcus, I needed you to take the situation seriously. If I'd told you it was just a teenager visiting a creek, you wouldn't have treated it as priority response. I framed it as security threat so you'd understand the urgency of establishing control. She confessed to lying, I said. She bragged about it. Thought she was explaining effective management strategy. Webb looked exhausted. I've worked with a lot of clients over 20 years. Some are paranoid, some are vindictive, some are just scared. But Whitmore, she's something else. She uses security as weapon. finds people's legal behaviors, reframes them as threats, then uses contractors like me to enforce authority she doesn't have. It's systematic weaponization of private security. And you're willing to testify to all this? Federal court, state court, licensing hearings, civil trials, wherever it needs to be said. That woman turned me into her enforcer by lying about subjects and situations. She made me complicit in harassment by manipulating my legitimate security concerns. Webb stood, extended his hand. I'm sorry about your son. Truly. What I did was wrong, even if I didn't understand the full situation. But I'm going to make sure every investigator knows what happens when clients lie about subjects. No license is worth becoming someone's personal attack dog. I shook his hand. Your cooperation is going to help prosecute wire fraud, witness intimidation, and civil rights violations across 5 HOAs. You're doing the right thing. I'm doing what I should have done 18 months ago, questioning why a 7-year HOA president needed so much enforcement against her own residents. After leaving Webb's office, I called Karen Liu with the update. We've got the bounty hunter's full cooperation, including recorded confession from Whitmore admitting she fabricated threat assessments. That locks down intent, Karen said. She didn't just make mistakes, she knowingly lied to enforce restrictions she knew were illegal. Daniel, we're ready for grand jury. Next week we present. 2 weeks from now, Denise Whitmore gets arrested. I thought about Tyler, still carrying that memorial stone everywhere because he didn't feel safe leaving it at the creek. About Catherine's final wish being weaponized into citations and force. About every family the board president had terrorized by turning security into control and grief into trespassing. Good, I said. Let her learn what accountability looks like. The federal courthouse steps were crowded with media when we filed the criminal complaint on Thursday morning. Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Torres stood at the microphone flanked by Detective Sarah Park and FBI Supervisory Agent Karen Liu, a coordinated show of multi-agency prosecution that sent a clear message about the scope of what we'd uncovered. Today, federal and state authorities are announcing charges against Denise Whitmore, longtime HOA board president across 5 communities in Virginia and Maryland. Torres began, reading from the indictment. Ms. Whitmore is charged with 47 counts of wire fraud, RICO conspiracy, witness intimidation, and filing false police reports. The charges stem from a 6-year scheme involving fraudulent billing of homeowner associations for security equipment her private company retained ownership of, followed by charging residents monthly fees for systems their HOA dues had already funded. Cameras flashed as reporters scribbled notes. I stood to the side with Tyler, watching justice become public record. The investigation began when Ms. Whitmore hired a private investigator to physically detain a 16-year-old resident who was accessing a public easement where his late mother's ashes had been scattered, Torres continued. When the teenager's father, an FBI special agent, investigated the incident, he discovered systematic fraud across 5 homeowner associations totaling over $700,000. Detective Park stepped forward. Virginia State Police are filing additional charges of malicious prosecution and witness intimidation. Ms. Whitmore falsely accused multiple HOA board members of embezzlement and other crimes when they questioned her financial practices. We've identified 7 victims across 5 communities who were threatened, harassed, or forced to resign to avoid Ms. Whitmore's retaliation. Karen took the microphone. This case demonstrates what happens when individuals abuse positions of trust for personal profit. HOA board members are elected to serve their communities, not to run criminal enterprises disguised as security consulting. The FBI takes wire fraud seriously, especially when it involves systematic victimization of families in their own neighborhoods. A reporter called out, "Is it true she hired a bounty hunter to grab a teenager visiting his mother's memorial?" Torres nodded. Ms. Whitmore hired a licensed private investigator and provided false information claiming the teenager was a drug dealer conducting transactions. She did this knowing the subject was a grieving minor accessing public property where his family had scattered his mother's ashes. The investigator is cooperating with authorities and has provided evidence that Ms. Whitmore deliberately misrepresented the situation to justify force. "What's the potential sentence?" another reporter asked. "Wire fraud carries up to 20 years per count. With 47 counts, Ms. Whitmore faces potential life imprisonment if convicted on all charges. The U.S. Attorney's Office will seek significant prison time given the scope, duration, and systematic nature of the fraud." Tyler squeezed my hand as we watched the press conference. This was bigger than our family now. This was about every resident the security consultant had victimized, every board member she'd intimidated, every family she'd driven away through manufactured fear. After the press conference, we drove to the county planning office where James Reynolds was preparing the final paperwork for the Creek Memorial designation. Catherine Cross Memorial Nature Sanctuary would be official by next week, protected public space that no HOA could ever restrict again. "Your wife chose well," Reynolds said, showing us the designation map. "This creek has been public easement since 1987. Now it'll be protected memorial space in perpetuity. No future board president can do what Whitmore did." Tyler traced the boundary on the map, his finger following the creek where his mother's ashes had settled. "She can't stop me from visiting anymore." "No one can," Reynolds confirmed. "Public memorial sanctuaries have protections beyond standard easements. Access is guaranteed, surveillance is prohibited without county approval, and any attempt to restrict access is prosecutable offense." "When can we put the official marker?" I asked. "County Commission votes next Tuesday. If approved, and it will be, you can install permanent memorial marker within 30 days. He showed us the proposed design, a bronze plaque with Catherine's name, dates, and her quote about finding peace in wild places. Your son's painted stone becomes the informal memorial. This becomes the official recognition. That evening, we got the call we'd been waiting for. Federal marshals had arrested Denise Whitmore at her home. She'd been processed, arraigned, and bail was set at $250,000, high enough to ensure she understood the severity of what she faced. "She's claiming the charges are retaliation for enforcing HOA rules," Karen told me over the phone. Her attorney is already spinning this as federal overreach against community governance. Let him spin. We have 6 years of financial records, 7 witnesses to intimidation, recorded confessions, and emails ordering force against a minor. The evidence speaks for itself. Agreed. But be prepared. This is going to get ugly before it gets resolved. Whitmore has resources, connections, and 7 years of built-up authority in those communities. Some residents will support her, claim she was protecting property values and safety. Some residents believe her lies. Others are finally free to speak truth. I thought about the families Howard had mentioned, the ones who'd been cited for using public paths, the board members who'd been threatened into silence. "When's the arraignment?" "Tomorrow morning. Federal courtroom, 9 a.m. She'll plead not guilty, argue for bail reduction, and her attorney will demand trial. Standard procedure. I'll be there." "Daniel, you're a witness. You shouldn't—" "I'm a father who watched my son get grabbed at his mother's memorial. I'm going to look the woman who ordered it in the eye and let her see exactly how much her authority is worth now." Karen was quiet for a moment. "Don't do anything that compromises prosecution." "I won't. I'll just sit in that courtroom and watch the board president realize that power without legitimacy is just tyranny waiting for handcuffs." Tyler came downstairs as I hung up. "They arrested her?" "An hour ago. Arraignment tomorrow morning." "Can I come?" I looked at my son, 16 years old, carrying his mother's painted stone, still processing trauma from being grabbed by a stranger at his grief sanctuary. "You sure you want to see her?" "I want her to see me. Want her to know she didn't break me, that I'm still visiting Mom's creek, still painting the stone, still finding peace, exactly like Mom wanted." His voice was steady, stronger than it had been in weeks. "She tried to criminalize my grief. I want her to see it didn't work. Then we'll both be there, together." That night, I sat in Catherine's old office, surrounded by photos of her with Tyler at the creek, teaching him to skip stones, showing him how to identify bird calls, laughing as he splashed in shallow water. She'd chosen that place deliberately, knowing it was public land no one could take from him. The security consultant had tried, and she just learned that some places are protected by more than bylaws and authority. They're protected by law, by love, and by fathers who won't let anyone weaponize their son's grief. Tomorrow, Denise Whitmore would stand in federal court understanding that lesson permanently. The Riverside Meadows Community Center had never been this full. Word of Denise's arrest had spread through all 5 HOAs like wildfire, and residents who'd spent years afraid to question her suddenly found courage in numbers. The emergency board meeting had been called to address recent legal developments, bureaucratic language for the systematic fraud that had just been exposed to federal prosecutors. I stood at the back with Tyler, watching 200 residents pack into a space meant for half that many. Howard Chen sat at the board table looking both relieved and terrified. The other 4 board members, all of whom had signed off on Denise's fraudulent contracts, looked like they wanted to disappear. "This meeting is called to order," Howard began, his voice shaking. "As you've all seen in the news, our former board president, Denise Whitmore, has been arrested on federal wire fraud charges, along with state charges for witness intimidation and filing false police reports." The room erupted, residents shouting questions, demanding answers, wanting to know how this had happened under their watch. "How much did she steal?" someone called out. "Current accounting shows approximately $743,000 in fraudulent billing across 5 HOAs over 6 years, Howard said, reading from the financial audit. "That's just equipment purchases." She was also charging residents monthly monitoring fees for systems their HOA dues had already funded. Total additional revenue from fees is estimated at over $400,000 annually. More shouting. Families realizing they'd been paying twice, once through HOA dues, once through monthly charges, for security systems they thought they owned. "What about the surveillance?" another voice asked. "Those cameras watching our homes, who owns them?" "Denise's private company, Secure Watch Community Systems. The HOAs paid for installation, but she retained ownership. Every camera, every monitoring system, every access control, all of it belongs to her company, not the community." "That's theft." "That's wire fraud, which is why federal prosecutors are involved." Howard's hands were steadier now, finding strength in finally telling the truth. But it's not just financial fraud. She was also using HOA authority to restrict access to public easements, filing false citations, and hiring private investigators to enforce rules that didn't exist. A woman I didn't recognize stood. "My mother was cited for walking her dog on the creek path. Denise said it was HOA restricted property. My mother paid $1,500 in fines." "That path is public easement," I said from the back, pulling out the county planning documents. "Protected since 1987. Every citation issued for creek access was fraudulent. Your mother can file for restitution." All heads turned toward me. Some recognized me from news coverage. Others had seen me at neighborhood events with Tyler. "You're the FBI agent?" someone asked. "I'm a resident whose son was hired a bounty hunter to physically detain for visiting his mother's memorial at that same creek." I walked forward, Tyler beside me. "Denise told her contractor my son was a drug dealer conducting transactions. She lied to justify force against a grieving teenager because his visits proved she didn't control what she claimed to control." The room went silent. People stared at Tyler, at the memorial stone he still carried, understanding flooding their faces. "Your son was the kid in the news reports?" the woman with the dog-walking mother asked. "My son was one of dozens of residents Denise targeted for challenging her authority. She didn't just commit financial fraud. She weaponized HOA enforcement against anyone who questioned her. Board members who raised concerns about finances were threatened or forced out. Residents who used public easements were cited and harassed. Families who opposed her surveillance installations were labeled security risks." Howard pulled up emails on the projection screen. Denise's own words, threatening board members, ordering surveillance, instructing Marcus Webb to use physical force. The room watched in horror as years of systematic abuse played out in bullet points and timestamps. "She kept files on all of us," Howard said quietly. "Personal information, bankruptcies, divorces, medical issues, legal problems, anything she could use for coercion if someone opposed her. I was threatened with exposure of my bankruptcy from 10 years ago. Martha Rodriguez was falsely accused of embezzlement. Brian Foster was told his son's juvenile record would become public if he voted against security contracts. This is extortion, someone said. This is how she maintained power for 7 years, Howard confirmed. Fear, intimidation, and carefully documented leverage against anyone who might challenge her. The back doors opened. Federal agents entered, led by Karen Liu. Behind them, news cameras, reporters covering the aftermath of the arrest. "Ladies and gentlemen," Karen said, FBI badge visible, "I'm Supervisory Special Agent Liu. I'm here to inform you that the investigation into Denise Whitmore's activities is ongoing. If any of you were cited for accessing public easements, charged fees for security systems your HOA funded, or threatened by Ms. Whitmore for questioning her financial practices, we need your testimony." Hands shot up across the room, dozens of them. Families who'd been too afraid to speak suddenly desperate to be heard. "She cited us for having a garden shed that was 2 inches too tall," an elderly man said. "Cost us $3,000 in fines. We thought we were violating rules. She told us our son couldn't use the playground because his noise disturbed other residents, a mother added. He's 7. He was just playing. She threatened to report my husband to immigration, another woman said, voice breaking. Said she'd have him deported if we opposed her fence color regulations. Story after story, family after family. The board president's 7-year reign of manufactured authority crumbling as people finally felt safe enough to speak. Tyler stepped forward, still holding his memorial stone. She hired someone to grab me at the creek where my mom's ashes are. Told him I was a drug dealer so he'd use force. When he realized I was just visiting my mom's memorial, he let go. But she never apologized. Never admitted she was wrong. She just kept saying I was trespassing. The room was silent now, watching a 16-year-old hold up a painted rock that represented everything Denise had tried to destroy. My mom died 18 months ago, Tyler continued. She chose that creek because it's public land, because she knew I could always visit, that no one could take it away. The board president tried anyway, and when my dad investigated, he found out she'd been hurting families for years, using fear and fake rules to control everyone. Karen approached Tyler gently. Son, would you be willing to testify about what happened? Yes. Tyler's voice was steady. If it helps other families, if it makes sure she can't hurt anyone else. It will. And it does. Karen looked at the crowd. Ms. Whitmore faces 47 counts of wire fraud, witness intimidation, RICO conspiracy, and multiple state charges. With this many victims coming forward, we're looking at decades of federal prison time. But we need all of you. Every citation, every threat, every false charge, documented and testified to. Howard stood. I resigned as treasurer this morning. I can't serve on a board that enabled this for years, but I'm providing every financial record, every email, every document showing how she operated. The rest of the board should do the same. The other 4 board members shifted uncomfortably. One finally spoke. We didn't know the extent. You signed off on payments. Howard cut him off. You approved contracts. You might not have known about the wire fraud specifically, but you knew something was wrong. We all did, and we stayed silent because it was easier than fighting her. Then it's time to make it right, Karen said. Cooperate fully. Provide testimony. Help us ensure no other HOA president can do what Denise Whitmore did. The meeting continued for 2 more hours. Residents organizing, sharing stories, planning civil suits. The security consultant's empire, built on fear and fraudulent authority, collapsing in real time as the people she'd terrorized finally found their collective voice. As we left, Tyler placed the memorial stone on the sign-in table. For anyone who needs to remember, grief isn't trespassing, and no HOA gets to criminalize love. 50 people took photos of that stone before the night ended. Within a week, Indarsha Catherine's Creek was trending, Tyler's memorial becoming a symbol for everyone fighting HOA overreach. Denise Whitmore had tried to erase one family's grief. Instead, she'd ignited a movement. 6 months later, I stood with Tyler at the creek as county workers installed the permanent memorial marker. Bronze plaque catching afternoon sun, Catherine's name etched above her favorite quote, "Find peace in wild places." The painted stone Tyler had protected through everything sat at the base, now part of an official county sanctuary. Catherine Cross Memorial Nature Sanctuary read the sign. Public access guaranteed in perpetuity. Tyler traced the letters with his finger, the same way he'd traced his mother's quote on the stone for 18 months. She'd love this, Dad. She'd love that you fought for it, that you kept visiting even when someone tried to make you afraid. I looked at the creek, at water that had carried Catherine's ashes and now carried legal protection, ensuring no one could ever weaponize this space again. Your mom chose this place because she knew it couldn't be controlled. She was right. The board president had learned that lesson the hard way. Federal trial lasted 3 weeks. Jury deliberated 4 hours. Guilty on all 47 counts of wire fraud, guilty on RICO conspiracy, guilty on witness intimidation. State charges came next. More convictions, more sentencing. Total, 36 years federal prison, with restitution orders totaling over $2 million when civil judgments were included. Denise Whitmore would be 74 before parole consideration. The security consultant's empire built on fear and fraudulent authority had collapsed into a prison cell and bankruptcy filing. But the impact went further than one woman's destruction. 4 other HOA boards had been dissolved and reformed. 7 board members faced civil suits. Marcus Webb lost his PI license but started teaching security ethics, using his own mistakes as cautionary tales. Howard Chen became advocate for HOA reform, traveling to communities teaching residents about public easement rights and financial oversight. And Tyler? My son who'd been grabbed at his mother's memorial for trespassing on public land? He'd written college application essays about standing up to authority when authority was wrong, about grief being a right, not a violation, about painted stones and federal wire fraud and finding peace in wild places, even when someone tries to criminalize that peace. He got into every school he applied to, chose environmental law, said he wanted to protect public spaces so no other families had to fight what we fought. Catherine would have been so proud. You know what's weird? Tyler said, watching the county workers finish installation. For months, I was terrified to come here, thought every time I visited, someone would grab me again. But now, with the official sanctuary designation, I feel safer here than anywhere. That's what protection looks like, not cameras and restrictions and hired security, just legal recognition that some places belong to everyone, and grief is a right no HOA can revoke. A family approached with flowers, strangers, but the mother's face showed recognition. Are you Tyler Cross, the boy from the news? Tyler nodded, suddenly shy. My daughter was cited by Denise Whitmore for accessing this same creek. She's autistic, comes here to regulate when she's overwhelmed. Denise called it trespassing, tried to fine us $2,500. The mother's voice broke. When I saw what happened to you, I finally found courage to fight back, got my citations voided, filed in the class action suit. We won, because you stood up first. Tyler looked at me, then back at the woman. I just wanted to visit my mom. And by doing that, you protected everyone else's right to visit too. Thank you. After they left, Tyler and I sat on the creek bank where everything had started. The spot where a bounty hunter had grabbed him, where my FBI investigation had begun, where Catherine's ashes had settled into water that was always public, always protected, always free. Think she's watching? Tyler asked. Your mom? Absolutely. Probably telling everyone in heaven about her son who took down a criminal enterprise just by refusing to stop grieving. Tyler laughed, first genuine laugh in months. She'd also say you went full FBI scary mode. She'd be right. Nobody puts hands on my kid at his mother's memorial. Federal wire fraud prosecution is the polite response. We sat in silence as sun set over the sanctuary, water reflecting bronze and gold. The memorial stone Tyler had painted, protected, carried through terror and investigation and trial, sat permanent now, part of official county recognition that some love survives death and bureaucracy and petty tyrants who think authority means control. Denise Whitmore had tried to erase one family's grief for profit and power. Instead, she'd created permanent legal protection, ensuring grief would always have a place in wild spaces. Sometimes, tyranny destroys itself by targeting the wrong family. Sometimes, a 16-year-old with a painted stone and an FBI agent father becomes the catalyst that dismantles systematic corruption. And sometimes, a dying woman's choice to rest in public water ensures her son will always find peace there, protected by law, honored by county, safe from anyone who mistakes authority for legitimacy. Catherine knew what she was doing when she chose this creek. She always did. Come on, I said to Tyler. Your grandma's making dinner. Said she wants to hear about the sanctuary dedication. Can I come back tomorrow? You can come back every day for the rest of your life. That's what public access guaranteed in perpetuity means. No citations, no surveillance, no bounty hunters. Just you and your mom and the wild place she chose. Tyler picked up the painted stone, held it to the light. The quote was fading again. Weather and time and 18 months of love wearing down the words. I should repaint it this weekend. She'd like that. The ritual of it. The maintaining and returning and never letting anyone make you stop. As we walked back to the car, Tyler turned one last time to look at the bronze plaque, at his stone, at the creek that was finally, officially, permanently protected. Thanks, Dad, for fighting for this. Thanks for giving me something worth fighting for. If you've ever been told your grief is trespassing, your love is a violation, your right to public space is negotiable, know this, it's not. Public easements exist to protect exactly these moments. Federal wire fraud laws exist to stop exactly these tyrants. And sometimes, a father's promise to a dying wife becomes the investigation that changes how HOAs operate. Denise Whitmore thought authority meant power. She learned it meant accountability. If you want more stories about standing up to HOA tyranny and protecting the places that matter, share your experience in the comments and let me know where you're watching from.